The moment I turned onto my cabin's dirt road, my stomach dropped. Something was off. The path I'd driven 100 times before, my own legal trail, the one the HOA supposedly couldn't touch, was blocked. Not by a fallen tree or a washed-out creek, but by a sleek black SUV parked smack in the middle, with HOA Karen glaring from behind the wheel like she'd claimed ownership of the entire property. I stepped out, hands raised in the universal gesture of let's be civil, but Karen didn't move. Instead, she leaned out the window and sneered. "You're not going in," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the crisp mountain air. Not today. For a split second, I considered turning around. That would have been the safe, easy option. But this was my land, my cabin, and my piece she was trying to steal. Something in me snapped. I wasn't about to let her get away with this stunt. I walked toward the SUV, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Karen, this is my legal access. You can't just block it." "Oh, I can," she shot back. "HOA rules are HOA rules, and I make sure they're enforced." Her smirk was familiar, one I'd seen countless times in HOA meetings, online posts, and passive-aggressive letters, but in person it was worse. Up close, it was threatening, overbearing, and completely unhinged. I noticed the little details that gave her game away. Her stance, the slight twitch in her jaw, the way she gripped her phone as if ready to dial every authority in the county. Karen wasn't just stopping me, she was trying to bait me into overreacting, to make me look like the villain. That was her mistake. I've dealt with bullies before, and I was ready. I calmly stepped aside, surveyed my surroundings, and began thinking 2 moves ahead. I knew I could get past her, and I knew I could do it without breaking the law. But Karen had underestimated me, big time. What she didn't realize yet was that this was about to become her worst HOA nightmare. I took a deep breath and circled the SUV, keeping my movements calm and deliberate. Karen's eyes followed me like a hawk, scanning for any sign of weakness or frustration. She thought this was a standoff she could win with intimidation alone. She was about to learn how wrong she was. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a narrow side path I'd used years ago, a barely visible trail that cut around the main access road. Technically, it was still part of my property, though the HOA had never approved it or even noticed it. Perfect. "Nice try, Karen," I called, loud enough for her to hear. "But blocking me isn't going to work." Her scowl deepened. "You don't get to choose which parts of your property you can use," she yelled. "You follow HOA rules or—" I didn't let her finish. I shifted toward the hidden trail, confident and deliberate, signaling that I wasn't afraid to move. She jumped out of the SUV, waving her arms, shouting, trying to intimidate me. But every step I took was legal, measured, and calculated. By the time I reached the narrow path, I'd already imagined every scenario in my head. If she tried to physically block me, I knew how to stay safe and call the proper authorities without giving her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Karen hesitated. That's all I needed. Hesitation in a bully is like waving a white flag. She lunged forward, but I was already steps ahead, moving into the trail where her SUV couldn't follow. From behind me, I could hear her screaming into her phone, probably calling the HOA, probably trying to get someone to enforce her rule. But I had done my homework. I had all permits, maps, and legal proof of my right to access the cabin. If she tried anything further, the law was on my side. The moment I stepped onto the trail, I felt a rush of satisfaction. I wasn't just getting past her. I was showing her that her intimidation tactics were worthless against someone who knew their rights and wasn't afraid to stand firm. Karen's face was a mix of rage and disbelief. She had expected me to stumble, to argue, maybe even back down. Instead, I was moving forward, literally and figuratively, while she stayed frozen, at the edge of my property, powerless. This wasn't just a victory of access. It was a statement. I wasn't someone she could push around, and Karen's overconfidence was about to cost her even more. As I walked deeper into the trail, the forest closing in around me, I could hear Karen pacing behind me, her voice growing louder and sharper. "You think you can outsmart me?" she yelled. "I'm making sure you regret this." Her threats didn't scare me, they fueled me. I knew she thrived on confrontation, but I also knew her tactics were predictable. Karen always escalated when cornered, and today, she'd cornered herself. The trail narrowed, forcing her to stay at the edge where her SUV couldn't follow. I pulled out my phone, not to argue, not to call her bluff, but to record everything. Every shout, every unreasonable claim she made, every over-the-top tantrum. If this turned into a legal battle, this evidence would be invaluable. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone calm, "this is my property. You're trespassing if you continue blocking my trail. You don't get to decide where I can or can't walk." Her face twisted in anger. She pulled out a stack of HOA pamphlets and waved them like a weapon. "This says I can. The rules are clear. I smiled, unfazed. Rules without legal backing are meaningless. I'd done my homework. The documents she brandished didn't apply to my private access road, and I knew exactly how to explain it if she tried to escalate further. That's when she made her biggest mistake. Karen stepped onto the trail trying to physically block me. I stopped and faced her, showing no fear. "Step off," I said firmly. "This is still my property, and you're trespassing." Her eyes narrowed, but she couldn't advance any further without crossing a line. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. The air between us was tense, electric, filled with the quiet hum of someone realizing they might have miscalculated. Then I did something subtle but powerful. I slowly moved past her, making sure she understood I was in control. She shouted and waved her arms, but there was nothing she could do. I had turned her intimidation into a show of my own authority, and it rattled her more than I could have imagined. By the time I reached my cabin, Karen was left at the edge of the trail, fuming and powerless. I stepped onto my porch, took a deep breath, and smiled. Today, I'd not only reclaimed my access, I'd taught her a lesson in respect, strategy, and boundaries. But this was far from over. Karen doesn't give up easily, and I could feel the tension still lingering in the air. She would be back, but next time, I'd be ready for her escalation. I barely had time to settle in before Karen's voice pierced the quiet evening air again. She had retreated to the edge of the property, but her SUV was still parked defiantly across my trail, a symbol of her stubbornness. I knew she wasn't finished. HOA, Karen never quits until she's humiliated everyone around her. I stepped onto my porch, surveying the situation. This wasn't just about access anymore. It was about control. She wanted to assert power, and I was about to show her who really owned the space. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the official property maps, permits, and HOA correspondence. Every document, every legal point I had carefully gathered over months, was ready. She thought she could intimidate me with threats, but I had facts, proof, and strategy, and facts always win over fury. Karen stomped closer, waving her phone like she was summoning reinforcements. "I've called the HOA, the sheriff, everyone," she barked. "You'll regret this!" I leaned against the railing, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Karen, you're trespassing. You're blocking legal access. Everything you're doing is documented. If the sheriff comes, I'll show them the law. You'll be the one in trouble, not me." Her face flushed with fury. She realized, finally, that her usual tactics, yelling, threatening, trying to manipulate people, were useless against someone who knew their rights. Then she made the classic mistake. She tried to cut through my side of the property to reach the cabin faster. I quietly called the non-emergency line, reporting her trespass with every detail, while still maintaining my distance. Within minutes, I heard the sirens approaching. Not the threat I feared, but the reinforcement that tipped the scales completely in my favor. Karen's eyes widened as the law arrived. She turned to me, her anger mixed with disbelief. I stood my ground, calm, collected, and unshaken. The black SUV, once her tool of intimidation, now seemed ridiculous and powerless. By the time the deputies spoke to her and reviewed the evidence, it was over. Karen had overstepped in every way possible, and the consequences were immediate. I hadn't just defended my access. I'd turned her arrogance into her downfall. I stepped back onto my porch, the cool evening air finally feeling like my own. My cabin was safe, my trail was clear, and Karen had learned a lesson she wouldn't forget anytime soon. The battle had been tense, but I'd emerged in control, calm and fully vindicated. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more epic HOA showdown videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a wild cabin confrontation. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would do if Karen tried this with your property. I love reading your strategies, and don't forget to smash that like button if you're all about standing your ground.